Hi, everyone, and welcome to our group presentation. Axa, Aurelia, and I, Berenice, will be introducing you all to Ernest Hemingway and his interesting life. We will start off by taking you down his historical time period.
We're going to start with where he was born. And Ernest Hemingway was born July 21st, 1899 at Oak Park, Illinois. He graduated both elementary school and River Forest High School. Next slide. He did actually after high school, he didn't go to college. He volunteered to be enlisted in the World War One. He volunteered as an ambulance unit in Italy. While he was on the front line on the World War One, he got injured and had to be hospitalized up to 6 months. After that, after World War One, he got his big break when he became a reporter for Kansas City Star newspaper. Next slide. Hemingway was married 4 times. His first wife was Hadley Richardson. They met in a party in Chicago. She was 8 years older than him. They moved to Paris. Then they had their first son. Then he cheated on her with his second wife. Her name was Pauline. He had 2 sons with her. After his death, he stated on his memoir that he blamed her for ruining his first marriage towards his wife. Um, After 3 weeks, they got divorced and he cheated on her with wife number 3, which is Martha Gellhorn. Martha was his third wife. He was a friend of the family. So basically, Pauline knew that he was cheating on her with Martha. Then he was more intellectually compatible with Martha just because they wrote the same thing. They were both writers and writing about the Spanish War. They were married for 5 years. They had a miscarriage, and he was his first wife that he didn't have kids with, but he cheated on her with wife number 4. Wife number 4 was Mary Welsh. They were both married to different people when they met. Once they felt like they were gonna move on with their relationship, they got divorced and got married. Um, Welsh was his longest wife. They were married for 15 years, and she's the one who actually found him dead when he killed himself the next morning. Next slide. Historical time period, personal life. Personal life. When I was reading the All Clean, Well, Light Place book, I related to Hemingway because I feel like he compared his character, the character of the old man, compare himself to him, just because they both tried to kill themselves and they did. And Hemingway was married. Also, the old man was married. They were both heavy drinkers. They were both also old. And in a section of the book, they both mentioned they saw a soldier with their nurse. When he was in World War One, he actually fell in love with the nurse, and he wanted to marry her, but the nurse rejected his offer just because she was in love with an Italian man. Next slide. This is a video of Ernest Hemingway's history under 3 minutes.
First time I would wager in all of your living memories, I now am proud to present to you the life and times of Ernest Miller Hemingway in approximately 3.5 minutes. Go! Born in Chicago in 1899, son of a physician and a musician, reasonably uneventful childhood, decided to study journalism. Enlisted with the Red Cross during World War I, got blown up in Milan and spent 6 months in hospital with severe shrapnel wounds in both legs. Fell in love with a nurse, they decided to get married. He came home to prepare. She stayed there and ditched him for an Italian soldier, which initiated a lifelong pattern of him rejecting women before they had a chance to reject him. Take note, Maddie. Got a job as a foreign correspondent, fell in love with his roommate's sister, married her, and moved to Paris. They hung out with Gertrude Stein. They kicked it with Pablo Picasso. He started writing in earnest, no pun intended, moved to Toronto, had a kid, moved back to Paris, published a couple of books, cheated on his wife, got divorced, married the other woman, converted to Catholicism. cut his head open after pulling on a cord thinking he was flushing a toilet and instead ripped a skylight from the roof and smashed it onto his face. Moved to Kansas City, had another kid. His dad committed suicide. He shot a lot of bears for some reason. Had a car accident, had another kid. Went to Africa to kill some wild animals and got dysentery. Come on. Published another book. Moved to Cuba, shot himself in the leg whilst aiming at a shark. Cheated on his wife, got divorced, married the other woman, published For Whom the Bell Tolls, sold 500,000 copies in a couple of months and got nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Cheated on his wife, got divorced, married the other woman, became the self-appointed leader of a band of village militia outside of Paris, and was subsequently brought up on charges for contravening the Geneva Convention and got away with it like a fucking champion. Got pneumonia, moved back to Cuba, and spent most of his spare time on his boat tracking Nazi U-boats with a machine gun and a pile of hand grenades. I am not making this shit up. Had a few more car accidents, 3 more concussions, got clawed while playing with a lion. Got depressed, drank, got fat, published a couple more books, went back to Africa to shoot some more wild animals, and barely survived 2 separate plane crashes in the space of 24 hours, winding up with a fractured skull, internal bleeding, cracked spine, ruptured liver, first-degree burns, and a paralysed sphincter muscle. Come on! Won a Nobel Prize, had a file opened on him by J. Edgar Hoover, left a bunch of shit in a safe in Cuba and moved to Idaho, paranoid that the feds were following him, which they were because he spent most of the 1940s working for the KGB. Again, not making this shit up. Suffered from hepatitis, nephritis, hypertension, hemochromatosis, anemia, and impotence. Come on. Got committed, received way too much electroconvulsive therapy and came out all fucked up, started hinting at suicide, so immediately got recommitted, received another couple of months worth of electroconvulsive therapy, got released, put both barrels of his favourite 12-gauge shotgun into his mouth and blew his fucking head off. What a guy! First time I...
Going more into his personal life, let's watch this short video of his childhood.
His father came back to him in the fall of the year, or in the early spring, when there had been jacksnipe on the prairie, or when he saw shocks of corn, or when he saw a lake, or if he ever saw a horse and buggy, or when he saw or heard wild geese or in a duck blind. His father was with him suddenly. In deserted orchards and in new plowed fields, in thickets, on small hills, or when going through dead grass, whenever splitting wood or hauling water, by grist mills, cider mills, and dams, and always with open fires.
Ernest worshipped his father, who spent hours teaching him how to hunt and fish and canoe, inculcating a lifelong fascination with the outdoors and with learning precisely how things should be done.
He instilled in this boy, before the boy almost could walk, this primal feeling for the beauty of nature, just the organic love for the woods, for water.
But Ed Hemingway was also severe, pious, opposed to drinking, card playing, and dancing. And as Ernest grew older, increasingly anxious, moody, and unpredictable. One minute he was laughing with his children, the next he was punishing them with a leather strap. Twice, Hemingway's father was so crippled by depression that he had to leave town for several weeks in order to rest what his wife called the worrying place in your brain. By the time Ernest was a teenager, he remembered, his admiration for his father had begun to turn to pity. He came to see him as weak and submissive and blamed his mother for his father's unhappiness. Ernest dreamed of one day becoming a naturalist or an explorer like his hero, Theodore Roosevelt. He was also a good student and a fervent reader who loved O. Henry, Jack London, and Rudyard Kipling. At his mother's urging, he sang in her congregational church choir and played the cello. He remembered that he especially enjoyed the repetition and counterpoint and repetition that ran through the works of Bach.
She also taught her kids what every musician teaches their kids, to practice. Don't come to me and say that you love art if you don't practice your art, because practice is love, work is love. And throughout his life, he was a tremendously disciplined writer.
In his junior year, he began to write, contributing sports stories and tales of adventure to the high school paper and its literary magazine. But he was remembered most by his classmates as a big, handsome, slightly awkward boy, fond of boxing, but too nearsighted and too clumsy to excel at team sports, who was shy with girls and preferred to hunt and hike and fish in the woods of northern Michigan whenever he got the chance. His shyness with women would eventually evaporate, but he would remain eager all his life for the company of men who shared his love of good times and the great outdoors.
Hi, this is Ken Burns.
All right, now let's take a break and play a game to see how well we know Ernest Hemingway. The game we will be playing is Two Truths and a Lie. I will start by reading 3 statements about Hemingway, and you guys let me know which one's a lie. Number 1, he was an ambulance driver in World War I. 2, he met a waitress named Agnes. 3, in Chicago, he met his first wife.
Number 2, he met a waitress named Agnes.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, mine, there's 2 truths and a lie. The first one is he was married 4 times. The second one is he had kids with 2 women. And then number 3 is he never cheated.
He never cheated.
Yes.
I agree. It's hard to believe he never cheated as he had so many wives.
Okay, so 2 truths and a lie. So for my 3 statements is Hemingway was not an influential writer. Number 2, he won a Nobel Prize for Literature. Number 3, his language and writing was simple and natural.
He was definitely an influential writer.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. All right. So now moving on towards his books and works. In 1926, his book, The Sun Also Rises, is a novel that became his first success. It's described as a pessimistic but sparking book as it deals with a group of aimless expatriates in France and Spain. Upon reading more about him, in 1951, he wrote The Old Man and the Sea, which became his most famous book, finally winning him the Pulitzer Prize in 1953. In 1954, he was awarded the Nobel Prize winner for literature. An interesting fact about him when it came to writing was that the writing of his books occupied him for most of his post-war years. He was in Paris majority of the time and traveled around for skiing, bullfighting, fishing, and hunting, which became part of his life and formed the background for much of his writing. Under the Britannica page, Hemingway's characters plainly embody his own values and view of life. Mentioning this, his short story of A Clean, Well-Lighted Place proves just that. I automatically thought that the old man in the story was Hemingway. He was an old and lonely man, and the waiters knew he once had a wife. The waiters had a life of their own they compared it to. While one who was in a hurry wanted to go home to his wife, and the other liked to stay late and be at the cafe. They share how different they are in having confidence and their actual realities in life. I like how this short story includes a lot of dialogue because It creates a connection between the characters and helps the reader imagine what's happening. Next, we will share a video of his Nobel Prize speech and let me know what you guys notice.
No writer who knows the great writers who did not receive the prize can accept it other than with humility. There is no need to list these writers. Everyone here may make his own list according to his knowledge and his conscience. It would be impossible for me to ask the ambassador of my country to read a speech in which a writer said all of the things which are in his heart. Things may not be immediately discernible in what a man writes, and in this sometimes he is fortunate. But eventually they are quite clear, and by these and the degree of alchemy that he possesses, he will endure or be forgotten. Writing at its best is a lonely life. Organizations for writers palliate the writer's loneliness, but I doubt if they improve his writing. He grows in public stature as he sheds his loneliness, and often his work deteriorates. For he does his work alone, and if he is a good enough writer, he must face eternity, or the lack of it, each day. For a true writer, each book should be a new beginning, or he tries again for something that is beyond attainment. He should always try for something that has never been done, or that others have tried and failed. Then sometimes, with good luck, he will succeed. How simple the writing of literature would be if it were only necessary to write in another way what has been well written. It is because we have had such great writers in the past that a writer is driven far out past where he can go, out to where no one can help him. I have spoken too long for a writer. A writer should write what he has to say and not speak it. Again, I thank you. No right.
So did you guys notice how different his speech is versus what we're used to hearing? He does not start with thanking his fans or supporters. Instead, he advises what writers should do. I like how he ended his speech with a writer should write what he has to say and not speak it. So enough about listening to me. Let's hear what Agsa has to share.
Okay, so influence on modern culture. Among many great American writers, Hemingway is famous for his objective and terse prose of style. As all novels Hemingway published in his life, The Old Man and the Sea typically reflects his unique writing style. The language is simple and natural on the surface, but actually deliberate and artificial. For most of being his writing career, Hemingway's descriptive style, occasionally a great deal of comment and controversy. Basically, his style is simple, direct, and probably as a result, his early newspaper training. The iceberg theory, or theory of omission, is a writing technique coined by American writer. Hemingway, as a young journalist, had to focus his newspaper reports on immediate events with little context or interpretation. So next we're gonna see a tech talk video, and this will teach us why in the English learning we like to learn about Hemingway.
Arrogant, racist, misogynist, narcissist, self-absorbed, self-centered. Who is being described in these deeply unflattering terms? Ernest Hemingway. Yes, Ernest Hemingway, the most famous American writer. As an English teacher, every year I think about, why do we still teach Hemingway? I have published 3 scholarly books on Hemingway, and I published most recently 3 books on teaching Hemingway on the topics of war, modernism, and gender. And yet every day I'm asked, how can you still be teaching Hemingway? Who was Hemingway? Born in 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois, he was brought up in an upper middle class family with a physician father and an opera singer mother. He pursued fishing, hunting, journalism, boxing, and football. He enlisted in the Italian Ambulance Corps, and in 1918, he was the first American wounded on the Italian front. He was twice decorated for valor. He wrote about Paris and Spain in The Sun Also Rises. He wrote about the Great War in A Farewell to Arms. He wrote the first English language guidebook to the bullfights in Death in the Afternoon. He wrote about hunting in Green Hills of Africa and covered the Spanish Civil War and wrote For Whom the Bell Tolls. After buying his boat, Pilar, he had 4 world records in big game fishing and wrote The Old Man and the Sea. He was married 4 times and had numerous girlfriends. He covered the D-Day invasion, the Battle of the Bulge, and he died by suicide after winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. Yet Hemingway comes to us as a conflicted figure, somebody who performed masculinity at a time when gender roles were shifting in American culture, and women were taking on a more dominant role, and men felt the need to strengthen their role. So Hemingway established his reputation in many ways through the manufacturing of different images. Here, we see Hemingway as the wounded soldier. He had 54 pieces of shrapnel in his knee. He looks heroic, but he was blown up while passing out chocolate and cigarettes. Here's Hemingway on safari in Africa. You can now buy kudu horns like that for $20 on eBay. Here's Hemingway pursuing his passion for big game fishing on the Gulf Stream. The meat from that 486-pound marlin went to waste. He passionately pursued the bullfights in Spain. For many, the bullfights are needless cruelty and not a cultural celebration. He covered the wars in Spain, in Italy, and in France, and afterwards suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. He had many encounters with women and was married 4 times. He was not a good father. And of course, there was the drinking. His alcoholism contributed to his manic depression and perhaps to his suicide. So Hemingway learned to perform masculinity. He created a manufactured image that told the viewer that he was living life to the fullest, that he was living an authentic life, and you, sitting at home, perhaps, or not. And this image was sold in the media. Hemingway's face appeared on magazines that were aimed towards educated audiences, such as Time and Life. But more significantly, Hemingway's image was sold to mass audiences in these glossy, slick magazines. For many, he became a representative man, again, at a time when what it meant to be a man was being contested, as women were emerging in the workforce and there was transitions in home and in the workplace. Thus, with all that is so problematic about Hemingway, why do we still teach him today? I turn to A Farewell to Arms in many ways as the best example of why we still teach Hemingway to today's students. It has the literary themes and the style to help students best understand Hemingway's world. For students, right, to read Hemingway is a sign of something that is cool, cynical, perhaps self-destructive, something that they're attracted to for reasons they may not quite be able to articulate. But once they are dropped into the rainy, war-torn landscape of Italy and understand the troubled world of Frederick and Catherine, they recognize that A Farewell to Arms is a great novel. What makes it great? Well, for many of us, it is because Hemingway incorporates the aesthetic principles of Paul Cézanne into his aesthetic code. In 1924, Hemingway first saw Cézanne's paintings at the Salon of Gertrude Stein in Paris at a time when he was forming his own aesthetic philosophy, when he was trying to decide what he wanted to do with his own brand of art. He wrote, he wanted to write like Cézanne painted. Cézanne started with all the tricks. Then he broke the whole thing down and built the real thing. It was hell to do. He wanted to write about country so that it would be there like Cézanne had done it in painting. You had to do it from inside yourself. There wasn't any trick. Nobody had ever written about country like that. He felt almost holy about it. It was deadly serious. You could do it if you would fight it out, if you'd lived right with your eyes. Cézanne was a French post-impressionist painter, right? And in his paintings, he's using short, repetitive, concentrated brushstrokes to break down the plane of the painting. It's a lesson that Hemingway was to learn from him. You could turn first to the opening pages of A Farewell to Arms. In the late summer of that year, we lived in a house in a village that looked across the river and the plain to the mountains. In the bed of the river, there were pebbles and boulders, dry and white in the sun, and the water was clear and swiftly moving and blue in the channels. Troops went by the house and down the road, and the dust they raised powdered the leaves of the trees. The trunks of the trees, too, were dusty, and the leaves fell early that year. And we saw the troops marching along the road, and the dust rising, and leaves stirred by the breeze falling, and the soldiers marching, and afterward the road bare and white, except for the leaves. Notice the repetition of Hemingway's language. He's repeating words like Cézanne is using brushstrokes. We have the word water twice, dust 3 times, leaves 4, white twice. Notice too, we have things that are rise and are raised, fall and are fallen. Hemingway is showing the interconnectedness of the natural world because of the way that the dust rises, the leaves fall early that year, showing us how the war has disrupted the natural cycles. Nature is damaged by war. Notice too how Hemingway uses motion. This is part of the trick of Cézanne, to capture life in motion on a canvas, right? We have the soldiers marching, we have the water flowing, we have the dust rising, and we have the leaves falling. And afterward, everything bare and white. Right? Hemingway is trying to capture a dominant idea of nature to show how everything is elementally connected. From Cézanne, Hemingway learned that these short, concentrated brushstrokes, right, would just in the same way be employed in his writing. As you look at a Cézanne canvas, you can see how his brushstrokes give us a house, perhaps a roof, perhaps a tree. in the same way that Hemingway's words, dust, leaves, wind, give us that same sense of motion as we get in the Cezanne canvas. So as we think about why we still teach Hemingway's fiction, right, we see with students that they embrace Hemingway's realism as their own. They hear it and it echoes. As they navigate the cold world of adults and the treacherous world of teenagers, they find lessons in Hemingway. In the words of a legendary English teacher at Phillips Exeter Academy, Harvard Knowles, in giving us stories that root us in our own experiences, Hemingway shows us not only who we are, but also forces us to consider what we may become. What greater teacher could we possibly want for our young? Bully, racist, narcissist, misogynist, obnoxious, and self-centered. Yes, we have to reconcile the tension between an image that is so ugly and an art that is so beautiful, and the role of regressive masculinity in American culture. Yet Hemingway endures, his best writing endures because he teaches us lessons about how to live according to our values and what it means to be human today. Thank you.
So this concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching.